In this lesson, we're going to be talking about naming your emotion. So, understanding your brain is going to help you to employ some practical solutions. So, for example, your amygdala, this small almond-shaped part of your brain, is a transition point between the sensory information from your environment and your emotional responses. So, in the days before the dawning of thought and language and emotion, your amygdala was primarily involved in your survival defenses. And if your amygdala calculated that your best option was to fight, that's what you would do. But that's not the same as the emotion of anger. Anger is related to, but it's not the same as the automatic fight response. So your prefrontal cortex is at the center of your cognitive processes of thinking and reasoning and problem solving. I call this the mommy part of your brain because it's the part that says, maybe that's not such a good idea. So this brain region has connections to your amygdala, and it's the control center for your emotions and defense. So both regions switch many emotions on and off, including anger, but they do so in different ways. And so how do we use this information to kind of benefit ourselves? So we have to recognize when we're angry and know that it's a cognitive process. So you can use your cognitive capabilities to calm an overly alert and reactive amygdala with a single word, just the name of your emotion that you're experiencing. And this approach can have a calming effect when the emotion is anger. So let's take a look at how this works. When you name your emotion or your affect, the label originates in our rational brain, and then it trickles down to the amygdala, and it reduces the anger intensity. So counselors and psychotherapists often encourage people to recognize and name their emotions. It's also called affect labeling. So you can encourage yourself to do the same thing. And over the next week, you're likely to have one or more anger experiences. So you can look at this as an opportunity to do an affect label experiment. Does naming anger have a detectable calming effect on your amygdala? The next example here shows how to do this experiment. You're going to see a column for emotion activating situations, one for affect label, one to record the intensity of your affect after you named your emotion. And so for this experiment, you use the word either anger when you feel angry or another anger-related word that best describes your feeling, like irritable or annoyed or frustrated. And again, affect is just your emotion. So here, the situation is I was cut off in traffic. I felt anger. When I named the emotion, I felt less tense. If I misplaced my report, I felt frustration. When I named it, I felt less tense. If I was betrayed by a coworker who took my idea without crediting me, I was angry, I labeled it, I still felt the same. So we can try this experiment out. So it's your turn to try out your affect labeling. You can do this at your own pace. When an anger situation comes up, write down the situation, the word that reflects how you feel, and the affect intensity. See if your emotional tone changes, and if it does, in what direction does it change? Think about this. Does naming your emotion have a calming effect? If it does, then now you have a new tool for helping yourself with anger. It's very simple and convenient to use. But if you get mixed results, you've learned when the technique is helpful and when it's not, and when maybe it's going to be helpful. So this is the beauty of the no failure approach. The feedback you get is just informational. And when you're feeling your anger bubble over, you can count to 10, walk around the block, imagine your positive thoughts combating your negative ones, or you can count your aggressive thoughts. Any of these techniques buy time to lower your risk of acting on the aggressive thoughts and impulses. So let's look at the counting technique here. By taking a thought count of your non-aggressive and your aggressive thoughts, you're making yourself aware of what you're thinking and roughly how often. So there's a little bit more to it than that, though. When you measure a human process, this normally changes the process because you're observing it. So that change can then be positive. So in this case, counting the non-aggressive and the aggressive thoughts at predetermined times helps to increase the non-aggressive thoughts and reduce the aggressive thoughts. So you might lessen the intensity of the aggressive thoughts when you recognize them and measure them. And you can use whatever counting system works for you. You can use like a manual count with a short slash mark for each thought, or a tally counter. Tally counters kind of have a button on it, or some other means, however you want to do it, of collecting the information on thoughts or actions that you want to count. So you make a click for each target thought. So we're going to go over a few examples here of the non-aggressive thoughts. A non-aggressive thought might be imagining yourself avoiding unnecessary conflicts, or imagining yourself helping others think before reacting aggressively, or imagining yourself taking responsibility for how you feel. And also imagining yourself avoiding the problem when you see you're starting to see that making a big deal over a small matter isn't worth it. An aggressive thought might be like, I'll make you suffer, you should die, I'll destroy you, I will hurt you. And even when we don't act on these thoughts, hostile, aggressive thoughts feel really unsettling. So for 4 consecutive days, I want you to make 2 recordings of aggressive thoughts and 2 recordings of non-aggressive thoughts at designated times. You can pick the times. Just take 1 minute at each time for the recording. If you're not having any aggressive thoughts at the time, just record the number 0. And then you can increase or decrease the intervals based on your experience. Some suggested times might be like 9 a.m., 1 p.m., 4 p.m., 8 p.m. If you had the same aggressive or non-aggressive thought more than once during the time interval, just list that thought once and count each separate incident. So recurring thoughts may be more significant than some of the other ones. You can use this chart that I'm going to show you to record your non-aggressive or your aggressive thought results, or you can download blank copies of this thought counting chart, as well as the chart to note special thoughts on this website here, newharbinger.com. And you will have to create an account, but it's free. If you have an aggressive thought at a time when you're recording non-aggressive thoughts, or vice versa, just tally and record the aggressive thoughts in the special thought note box. But aggressive thoughts don't necessarily follow a time schedule. The important thing is to know what you're thinking and to have a rough idea of how often you're repeating your non-aggressive or your aggressive thoughts. Then you're going to write down what you learned from your tally experiment. How can you use this information to self-improve? So here's a sample outcome. What did I learn? When I'm angry, my thoughts are aggressive. The more I think about the non-aggressive thoughts, the more that they surface, and I have fewer angry thoughts when I count the non-aggressive thoughts. And then how can we use this information? So you might recognize that non-aggressive thoughts can extend from anger and support positive actions, or refocus your thoughts from causing harm to determining a course of action to bring about a favorable result. And then congratulate yourself that, even when you have an aggressive thought, you can restrain yourself from acting them out. So now it's your turn to describe what you learned from your tally experiment. And remember, you're supposed to be trying this for at least 4 days. And then at the end of that 4 days, you're going to use this to record the information. Temporary solutions can really help to extinguish a short wick before that flame ignites something bigger. So you've consciously recognized a problem and chose a solution over a reaction, and that's a huge advance. So now let's talk about the empirical level. In the last lesson, we talked about the practical level, so now we're going to address the empirical level. You're going to think like a scientist and test things out. A scientist might change a factor and see if the results are any different. That's part of the experimental method. So let's say a neighbor's playing the music loud after 10 p.m. and you're having trouble hearing your TV over the sound. So you feel anger. The question is, why are you feeling anger? So the obvious answer here is that the music is the cause, or the damn neighbor's the cause. And there is a point to that view. Without the noise, would you have responded angrily? Probably not. But there's a little more to the situation when you view the situation through a lens of a scientific thinker. So when you decide to think scientifically, you're going to start by asking yourself 3 questions. What am I telling myself about the situation? What am I telling myself about my feelings? And what actions do I feel like taking? So in the chart that I'm about to show you, you're going to see how this empirical approach plays out using the neighbor's loud music example. So column 1 is a sampling of parasitic anger approaches. Column 2 is a coping approach, and column 3 is a possible outcome. So in this example, what am I telling myself? That this noise just shouldn't be. So an alternative coping approach to that would be to accept that what is. It's not what you think it should be. So in this case, acceptance doesn't mean acquiescence. Rather, it's just an acknowledgement of a fact. So you're going to ask yourself where this event ranks in importance in your life. In this case, the music is not a big issue in your life. It's more like a gnat bite. Nevertheless, it's still annoying, but not the same as world ending in a ball of fire. So a possible outcome of alternative coping would be you feel annoyed with the loud music, but you no longer have this strong urge to get back at your neighbor by blasting your music. So the second question is, what am I telling myself about my feelings? So in this example, you're probably saying, I can't stand it. So an alternative to this would be to ask yourself, why? Why can't I stand what I don't like? The reality is that you are tolerating what you don't like. But by defining a situation as intolerable, it becomes what you think it is, intolerable. And so when we use this alternative, our stress level is going to go down to a normal level. And despite the change in environment that you find aversive, you're no longer going to define it as intolerable. And then the third question here would be, what actions do I feel like taking? Well, I'm going to turn my speakers up towards the neighbor's residence, but blast the music louder. So an alternative to that would be to approach your neighbor and calmly ask him to turn down the volume. And a possible outcome might be that you find that your neighbor is out of town and his teenage son is blaring the music and the teen turns it off. So putting a spotlight on a problem, you may see it a little bit differently. So I want you to try this and use this chart when something like this comes up. What am I telling myself? What am I telling myself about my feelings? And what actions do I feel like taking? So we talked about the practical, the empirical. Now let's talk about the core level. So at a core level, you're exploring what's behind your parasitic anger patterns. So we're going to talk about 8 sample core issues along with some sample core solutions here. So the first core issue is having a stronger tendency towards anger than most. So solution here might be being mindful of that tendency and just taking a step back more often to reflect to avoid any needless anger crisis. Another issue may be believing that you are powerful when you're angry and intimidating and weak when you're not. Therefore, you're going to go out of your way to show that you're tough. So a solution might be to explore how to develop mental toughness through tolerance. The third core issue would be having a short trigger for anger when you're in a bad mood or you feel depressed. But we can use that anger signal to work on overcoming depression, as long as we're seeing it as a signal. The fourth core issue is having grown up in a family or a community that blamed others for their troubles and finding that you often do the same thing. So we can find ways to break that family tradition and set a positive new one. The fifth core issue would be having cynical beliefs, such as that you can't trust anybody and just automatically looking for proof of that belief. So the solution here would be to figure out what information you need on a case-by-case basis for deciding who merits the benefit of the doubt and who you wisely not trust. The sixth issue would be having a sense of entitlement to whatever you want, possibly basing your worth on succeeding and just angrily kicking back when you don't get your way. So we can learn to think outside of this all or nothing view to help ourselves forge a happier and healthier perspective. The seventh core issue would be believing that no one should dare challenge you and absorbing yourself too much in the importance of your views. So the solution here might be to just add a little bit of flexibility to your life by accepting that others have a right to their views, even if it's misguided. And lastly, the eighth issue would be having a low tolerance for tension, so being easily set off. So the solution here would be to develop methods of building a higher tolerance for the tension. So I want you to write down 3 priority core issues that merit your attention and your tentative core solutions, and just keep an eraser handy. You may alter this priority list with new information. And we're going to cover a lot of ground in these groups. Unless you have a photographic memory, you're going to forget a lot. So logging it is a tested way to keep track of important ideas and to have a direct way to access them later. So this is your progress log, and it has 5 sections. So you're going to have your key ideas, your action plan, your execution, your results, and your revisions. So in your key ideas for each lesson, you're going to write down what 3 ideas did you pick up from the previous groups that you found most helpful. On your action plan section, what 3 steps would you take to move closer to overcoming your anger excesses? In the execution section, you're going to write down what are you going to do to execute those steps? Like, what's the process? In the results section, you're going to do what you hope to learn or have reinforced by taking these steps. And then in your revisions section, if you want to make any changes in the process, what would you do differently next time? And I want you to keep this progress log for each lesson that you take.